Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2001 comedy sequel, American Pie 2. Now, due to the overwhelming success of the first film, it was inevitable that Universal was going to provide audiences with another slice of American Pie. And they did not hesitate when it comes to getting this film going. But what happened was they hired a writer who would eventually go on to write some of the spin-off sequels. They hired this guy to write the sequel. He turned in the script. They weren't happy with it, especially with the tone of it. So then they had to start from scratch. And that led to the film, in my opinion, suffering. I know for some people this is their favorite of the series. It's not my least favorite. That would go to American Wedding, but it definitely isn't as good as the first to me. And I feel that it definitely is a film that suffers from elements that are too rushed or things about it that don't quite work, or the writer and other people involved with it getting the wrong impression when it comes to why the first film worked as well as it did. And it just leads to a sequel that, while I can have some fun with it, and there are some subplots, especially the one involving Michelle and Jim, that I find to be sweet or charming or witty or enjoyable, it's just nowhere near as filling and nowhere near as satisfying as the first film was. And the first film was a movie that, honestly, I was genuinely surprised by how much I enjoyed it, because the sex comedy isn't one of my favorite genres of comedy, and I was aware of the first film's reputation for many, many years, and already felt like I'd seen it, and it just surprised me when it comes to the strength of its characters and the heart and soul of it. And yeah, there was some raunchy scenes, and there was some sequences and some entire plots that were focusing on sex, but it just felt that there was more to it than just that. And while there are some moments in this film that do provide a bit of a deeper meaning or some depth, this movie is so much more of a typical sex romp than the first film was. And I think that's probably why some people like it more, because it doesn't have as many elements of teen drama as the first film does, or something like American Reunion. But that's why I like the first film the most, and why I feel American Reunion is the second best film in the series, is because of the fact that it has those elements. It just makes it so much more easier to relate to and to connect with on a deeper level. You don't really connect with this film as much. It also suffers from the typical flaws that sequels ultimately deal with. Repeated gags, recycled elements, going back to the well one too many times, and just trying to one up the first film. And in this instance, trying to be raunchier and trying to be even more sex obsessed. It's directed by James B. Rogers, and I feel that having a different director here is also something that hurts the film. Uh, Paul Weitz made the film his own. He really made it something that connected with him, and you could see that connection on the screen. With the director here, it just seems like a typical sort of paycheck thing. The guy is there, he's there to shoot the script, he's there to get the shots done, and that's it. And as a result, you just have a movie that visually is similar to the first, in a way that it isn't that impressive technically. It doesn't have a lot of variety when it comes to the type of shots that are used or camera techniques, but it doesn't have the same charm as the first film did, because it's not a first time director behind the camera, and it's also not a guy who is integral to the reason why the film even got made in the first place, because he was so involved with it creatively. So you just get a guy who just in a lot of ways is just sort of another hired gun. And I know Paul couldn't do it because he was involved with Down to Earth, the Chris Rock film. So he couldn't do American Pie 2. And in all honesty, I think Down to Earth, it's not a great movie, but I would say I liked it. I do remember liking that a little bit more than this. And I felt Paul's direction in that, along with his brother, was a little bit better than what you get here as well. Which just makes me wonder what would have happened if Paul was allowed to direct the sequel with a bigger budget. And I honestly wish he was, because you get a director who's trying to emulate what Paul brought to the first film and trying to uh, uh, be the same kind of director, and it just doesn't work the same way. And the fact that it's like a $30 million budget and it still looks like a TV movie, it's not something you can necessarily excuse as easily as with the first film. It doesn't help either. This guy, he's gone on to do not much of anything. He did a movie called Say It Isn't So that came out the same year as this film did with Chris Klein, and it was a massive bomb. And after this, even though he made a massively popular film, because American Pie 2 was one of the highest grossing films of 2001, it didn't really lead to him getting a ton of jobs for big feature films in the future. So I think that really does speak to the fact that this guy isn't that good of a director. And so, yeah, what you get here is just so work, so effort, just kind of there when it comes to the direction. It could be worse, but also could be significantly better. And I just wish that you have a larger budget here. I just wish that you would have had a director who would have brought more to it. Maybe try to be a little bit more stylish with it. Go to places that this franchise hasn't been able to because of its limitations previously. But instead, what you get is just another film that just looks very similar to the first film visually. And the screenplay by Adam Hers, it's nice that Adam was brought back to the franchise, but at the same time, I think that this script definitely pales in comparison to what he did for the first movie. The main issue I have with this script is that it's just too sex obsessed and too focused on typical generic TNA sex comedy. There's an entire sequence involving two women who are acting like they're lesbians to screw with the guys that just drags on forever and a day. It feels like it's 40 minutes long. And there's other sequences like that in this movie that just don't really have the same irreverence, don't really have the same spontaneity as the first film. They just drag. And there are comedy bits that also drag on too long. And you have more Stifler this time, which I don't think is necessarily better, because the more screen time you give Stifler, the more annoying he is as a character. He's more tolerable to deal with when he's, on the side, and his whole shtick is not as prevalent. But when it's a major part of the film, it gets grating. And there's just a lot involved with this sequel that I felt was a letdown when it comes to the script. It starts off strong with the scene in college, uh, and featuring Jim in yet another awkward sex related scenario involving his dad. And the whole stuff in college, like, I thought it was going to be a college film. And I know that that would be a typical sort of location for this kind of movie and these kind of films at this time. But I just feel there would have been more to do with that location than just a house by the lake. Like it just felt like a house by the lake is very limiting when it comes to what you can do with the setting and what you can have these characters go through or be involved with. And I felt with a college setting, there would have been more that you could have done, and instead, it's just limited to this house by the lake. And so you start off in college, but then you move away from that pretty quickly. The four friends, you still buy that they're still good friends, but there's a lot of stuff involving their characterization that was just a miss for me. It felt like at the end of the first film they learned a lesson. They learned a valuable life lesson that there's more to life than sex and relationships with people that have genuine connections or just friendship in general is something that's very important in life and vital, and arguably even more important and even more viable and vital than sex. And it just felt like the writer missed that or forgot about that, because now these guys are just typical horny guys again. And there's entire sequences where they're just sex obsessed again. And I was just like, there's a whole bit with Finch where he's still obsessed with having sex with Stifler's mom, and to the point where he's learning tantric sex techniques. And it just it just didn't really feel like something that was earned when it comes to the characterization. It just felt like they went backwards. And then when it comes to Finch's character in particular, like it made the character really weak and very one note. And I know the writer attempted to try to provide some depth for Stifler, but it was left on the cutting room floor. There was a whole subplot involving his father, who's just as obnoxious and as much of a douchebag as he is, which explains why Stifler is the way that he is, but it was cut out because test audiences didn't like it. I know the writer tried to take some extra risks by having a whole entire subplot involving Oz and Heather where they were cheating on one another, but that wasn't well received, understandably so, so that was cut out. So I appreciate the fact that the writer did try to do some different stuff with the depth of the characters, but I don't think it was coming from the right place. And it felt it just by what I've heard, it just felt like it was more forced than natural when it comes to the depth of the characters. And there are some attempts to try to provide some heart and soul again, like the first film, which I really genuinely do appreciate when it comes to this script. The stuff involving Jim and Michelle, and the sequences where Michelle was teaching Jim to be a better lover, to prepare him for Nadia's return, are sweet. They're charming, and the eventual twist where Jim falls for Michelle, it was heartwarming and it was really well done. And I think that's the biggest strength of this script, is that particular subplot and that aspect of it. I also feel the stuff involving Kevin and Vicky was also good too, where Kevin learns that he can just be friends with her and it's okay. And there's some growth there when it comes to his character. But the stuff with Finch, it seems like he's learning something, but then he just goes back to banging Stifler's mom in a car by the end of the movie. So there is no growth for his character. It's all erased for just another, oh, he's fucking Stifler's mom joke, because it was so well received in the first film. So let's have an encore. Stifler, he doesn't learn anything either. And it's just one of those things where it is uneven. It's a very uneven script. There's even attempts to try to be even more shocking than the pie scene where Jim mistakes lubricant, well, mistakes super glue, my bad, for lubricant, and then gets a porno tape glued to his hand and his hand glued to his own dick. But even that just felt like it just felt like it was just trying so hard to one up the pie scene, and it just it was just kind of a sequence that just fell a little flat for me. The best parts of it were the scenes involving his dad at the emergency room, but even then, some of that went on too long, and yeah, that is a problem with this script. Stuff just drags out too much. Where in the script for the first film, it felt like a lot of the gags, a lot of the moments, they were a little more pointed. They weren't as elongated, and they were funnier because of that. And a lot of the stuff in this is just they stretch it out so much, and then it just isn't as funny. And the characterization is weaker. The way that certain characters act after they supposedly learned a life lesson, it just feels out of place. Like just the whole way that Oz is handled here, I just didn't like. He initially starts out as being a loyal boyfriend, and then he's perving on these girls at the construction job and going up the ladder to get a peek, and it just undermines what he's been saying previously, where he doesn't want to be involved with any other girl other than Heather, but then he's still taking a peek at these other girls. And I guess it might have made more sense if you had that subplot where he actually would followed through with that urge and cheated on her, and she cheated on him. But since that whole entire subplot was cut out, it just comes across like he's a jerk. Like, oh, you're saying how she's the only one for you, but then you're okay with perving on these girls through the window. Like, what the hell, dude? Like, seriously. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff with the characterization that just wasn't as strong as what was present in the script for the first film. And yeah, just a lot of the stuff that was focused and sex obsessed, it just wasn't funny to me. I know it was funny, probably funny for other people, funny for audiences back then, but a lot of it just really fell very flat, and I didn't laugh. And even some of the attempts to try to recreate the whole raunchiness with the trumpet up Jim's ass, even that felt like it was forced. There's just a lot of stuff in it that just didn't work nearly as well. And all of that being said, because of the already established strength of these characters, and because of some genuinely sweet elements of the script, like Michelle and Jim's relationship, it still manages to be an okay script, but I think it could have been so much more than that. If there was more thought put into it, and if there was more of a focus on character and heart and soul instead of sex and raunch. Now, the cast all returns here, and they're still equally as good as they were previously. They still have really good chemistry. You still buy them as friends. Jason Biggs, Chris Klein, Thomas Ian Nicholas, Seann William Scott, Eddie K. Thomas. Um, you have Tara Reid and Natasha Lyonne and Mena Suvari also in this, but they're not in it as much, along with Shannon Elizabeth. Of course, Eugene Levy is still incredible, still excellent as Jim's dad, Noah. The Shermanator is another cameo. He's okay. You don't really have any newcomers though, so I think that would have helped things be a little fresher, like a new girl for maybe Thomas Ian Nicholas to fall for. or, something along those lines, but you don't really get that. So that makes things a little stale as well. But the performances are definitely not stale. Jason Biggs is still charming. Chris Klein still, despite how uneven his character is written, he still provides the same amount of charisma to that character. Thomasine Nicholas still works as the guy who's a leader of the group, who even sets everything up for the guys to go to the cabin, uh, or the house by the lake. Stifler's still a dick, and Seann William Scott is still in prime form, playing total douchebag, but the kind of douchebag that you still kind of like, but he's a little more grating this time because there's more screen time. And that also exposes Seann William Scott more because he's just not as polished of an actor at this time in his career. So at least as some of the scenes involving Stifler, there's some stiff acting because Seann William Scott just isn't quite there yet as an actor. Eddie K. Thomas, I like the actor. He does the best that he can with this, but what can he do with this tantric sex thing? It's dumb. It's dumb. It's not funny. And it just makes him look like a total jackass. And then the whole stuff involving him and Stifler's mom again, it was just tired. Of course, yeah, you have Jennifer Coolidge who's back, but it's just very tired. And that being said, like, Alyson Hannigan was awesome. She was one of the biggest highlights of the film when it comes to her performance in it. And Tara Reid was fine too, so was Mena Suvari, but really it was Alyson Hannigan who in my opinion stole the show. And any scene involving her was definitely a bright spot for me when it comes to this sequel. The film visually, despite it having Mark Irwin, who is an incredibly accomplished cinematographer who worked with Cronenberg on a ton of different films and even other movies like RoboCop 2 and I Come in Peace, and even There's Something About Mary, it still doesn't look that great. It looks better, I would say, than the first film, but still not a great looking movie. But then again, like, what can Mark Irwin do with such a limited setting, which is just a house by the lake and like a little beach, like there's in a very small town. There's only so much he can do cinematography wise. The editing by Larry Madaris and Stuart H. Pape, it's okay. It's fine for the kind of film that it is. I would say it's at its best when there are scenes that are lively and have a lot of different things happening on screen, like the opening sex scene that turned into a total fail, or the sequence where Jim is trying to sneak out of the house to try to get his hand off his dick because he super glued his hand to his dick, and he's on the roof. Like, that was a well edited sequence, and there are a few other moments like that that I felt had some good editing in them. The music by David Lawrence, barely even notice it, which I think was a good choice. They focused pretty much primarily on uh, uh, licensed music tracks for the film, and that was definitely the right idea because the licensed music tracks they picked really did a good job creating a good vibe and enhancing the film and making it more fun and entertaining to watch. And it's longer this time, which you definitely do feel it. You feel that extra 10 minutes, if you ask me. And if the original subplots that were cut from the film were put back in, it probably would have been even longer. And I just don't really feel that that's the best approach for an American Pie film. It does not need to be anything longer than like 90-95 minutes. I know some of the other sequels were around the same length or runtime, but those sequels suffer from some pacing problems as well. So I just feel that, yeah, pacing was definitely an issue with this, especially when there were just so many sequences that just dragged forever. The girls who are acting like they're lesbians, but they're not really. Like that scene was just excruciating to sit through for me because it was just a pretty one note gag to begin with, and it was just stretched out way beyond the point of no return, and it just it just killed the pacing of the movie. Like the film comes to an absolute stop when that scene just goes on and on and on and on. And there's other sequences like that have a similar pace to them, and honestly, it could have benefited from being even shorter than 95 minutes, maybe, because there's not a lot there anyway when it comes to the plot or the script to begin with. And the $30 million budget, it doesn't really seem like it's on the screen. It looks like it cost the same amount of money as the first film did. But yeah, it's not what I would consider to be a bad film, but yeah, it's not one of the better sequels to me. I know there's some people who argue that it's like one of the best comedy sequels. I disagree. I think there are other comedy sequels that are better than this. It is better than some comedy sequels. Like there are some comedy sequels that are so much worse than this, but I think you can also do better than American Pie 2. I think you can do better in this franchise than American Pie 2 with American Reunion. But American Pie 2, it's fine. It's as to me, in all honesty, it's as filling and as enjoyable as leftover apple pie. There's some leftover apple pie in the fridge. It's been there for a few days. You got to eat it before it goes bad. So it's a little stale, but with some whipped cream and some ice cream, like it's still palatable. It's still enjoyable enough, but it's definitely not as good as a fresh slice of pie. That's really how I feel about American Pie 2. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of the film, and till next time, I'll see you later. See ya.